Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Royal Geographical Society for this, our third evening of adventure. My name's Johnny Bealby. I founded Wild Frontiers, and tonight I think we are in for a real treat as we have three really compelling stories from three very different parts of the world as told by three adventurous spirits. First thing I should say is well done all of you for getting here. Just shows what an adventurous spirit you all have. When we saw the snow coming down at 12 o'clock today, I was thinking, oh goodness, this is going to be a disaster. But great that you've all made it, and I think shows, yeah, what a great adventurous spirit you have. Wild Frontiers is a commercial adventure travel company, so I hope you'll forgive me if I do pitch a couple of stories, trips to you tonight, which are relevant to the stories you're going to hear. But it's also about the Wild Frontiers Foundation and the money that we're raising tonight and how that money will be spent. So to kick things off, I am going to talk a little bit about what we did last year. This is the third evening of adventure. Last year, who we raised the money for and how we spent that money. Over the last 30-odd years, I've been lucky enough to travel all over the world and see some fairly amazing places. And I've come across in that time a lot of NGOs doing a lot of different aid projects. And the one thing that I've learned for when I was setting up the Wild Frontiers Foundation was that it's better to not be too ambitious. A lot of these aid projects were very good, some were indifferent, some weren't so good. And I realized that it's actually better to aim low and succeed than it is to aim high and fail. Over the course of the 9 years that the foundation's been going, we've provided funds for various different aid-related projects, both our own and other partner charities that we team up with. Mainly in education. We've provided computers for different schools. We've built a school in Pakistan, educational scholarships, one thing and another. But also disaster relief, where we help out when there's been an earthquake or a flood. And over that time, we have delivered around about £100,000 to good causes. So when a very special group of people came to us with a very specific problem that they wanted our help with, I was very keen to help. The Kalash are a pagan tribe that live in the far reaches of the Hindu Kush in northern Pakistan, sandwiched between Pakistan and Afghanistan in three narrow valleys. Anybody that knows the story of Wild Frontiers will know that they have played a fundamental part in our journey. It was here in 1996 that I spent 3 months while I was researching my second book, and this man, Saifullah Jan, was the man who suggested I set up a travel company. And so Wild Frontiers is actually named after the northwest frontier from this region where the Kalash live. They live a very fragile existence in a very fragile world. The Hindu Kush is a mountainous region that often has earthquakes, floods, etc. So when Saifullah came to me and said that the two floods that they had in 2013 and 2015 had not only devastated the land and the local communities and wiped out a couple of houses and one thing and another, he said there was a much more fundamental problem that they had to deal with, or he was worried that the village itself might be destroyed. And I'm going to show you a couple of pictures here just to illustrate what that is. Here you can see where the land gets cut away. You can see the kind of damage that the flood did. This actually is a picture of the school prior to the floods, and this is a picture of the school after the floods, completely destroyed, the children having to be schooled in tents. Saifullah asked me about 18 months ago if we could help support a project to rebuild the school in a new location, which we did, and in May of this year, the children will be moving to that school, so that's great. But that wasn't what he wanted the money for this time. He was very concerned that, as I say, the fundamental aspect of the actual village was at stake. Now, this is the village of Balanguru. It's in the valley of Rambur. It's the biggest Kalash village. It has about 600 people. There are only 4,000 Kalash in total. And I say again, you know, remember, this is a pagan tribe living surrounded by what is a fairly conservative Islamic region. So it's an extraordinary thing that they've managed to survive so long. But what he was worried about is that when the floods come, they come down here at in huge velocity and they tear away at the land. It's important to stress that these floods, they're not just a river in spate rising a few feet. They are basically higher up the valley. Mountains collapse, or great mudslides collapse, and coming down the valley is this huge wall of debris, boulders, trees, you name it, everything and mud within this great wall, almost like lava. Saifullah stood on a high bit and watched the last one come down, and he said it doesn't come down fast, it comes down slowly, it creeps down the valley, it's quite scary, some 10, 12 foot high. And of course that has enormous destructive power. So what he was worried about is that this area here was going to cut off and sever this part of the village and literally tear it away, not just the houses, but their lands as well. So he said, what we need to solve this problem is a flood defensive wall. We've all heard about that from our own country. He wanted £8,000 to build an 80-metre long wall, roughly £100 per metre. Bear in mind that it has to go as deep into the ground as it is high above the ground. Obviously, the force that these floods have is so powerful that if it doesn't have that, it would just wash the wall away. So we came here to the RGS this time last year. Michael Palin very brilliantly came along, gave a speech about traveling to the Kailash while he was making his series Himalaya. And from the ticket sales alone, we raised around £6,000. What was great was that shortly afterwards, within 2 weeks, our Just Giving page had swollen by another £4,000, which meant that Saifullah and the Kailash could not only get an 80-metre wall, they could actually get a 100-metre wall. So last May, I went out to Pakistan, as I often do, with a group, and we presented Saifullah with the money and laid the first ceremonial rock. That's me and Saifullah there. The rock really had nothing to do with it. We just needed a photograph. But about 3 months later, another of our tour groups went out there and took another photograph, and you can see what they have built. I haven't been out there yet, so I haven't got nice big photographs of the whole thing. That's the only one we've got. But you can see that, and for me, this is a great kind of representation of simple aid done well with an honest man, listening to what the local community wants and delivering it through a simple evening of adventure like this. So on behalf of the Kailash, I would just like to say thank you all of those of you who came last year to help raise this money, because not only have you protected a village, but you've actually protected a culture and a very fragile and important society. So thank you. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about tonight's charity partnership, because to do so would be to steal the thunder of our first speaker. As a writer and television presenter, our guest first speaker has made her name on live and factual programming, including Arctic Live, Lambing Live, Spring Watch, Back to the Land, Extreme Wives, and Living with Nomads. She's the author of 2 books and a regular contributor to various magazines and newspapers, including the Daily Telegraph. You might have seen her article last Saturday. She's the founder of Humble by Nature, a rural skills centre on a farm near her home in Wales, vice president for Farms for City Children and the Wildlife and Wetland Trust, and is a qualified commercial diver. She is also, I can tell you, a wonderful travelling companion. However, before I invite Kate up onto the stage, we're going to see a short film about the journey we recently made to Rwanda and the Congo. Oh, I should have had that before, sorry.
I can't quite believe I'm in the Congo. Chimps don't make it easy for you. They are right here, up in the trees. You cannot see them. And here's one coming down. And we have climbed down and down and down these incredibly steep slopes. And we keep hearing tantalising calls. They've been teasing us all morning, but this little one has come out, seems really curious.
Are you ready?
I am.
I'm ready
I'm
too.
ready.
Let's go. Look, they've been here eating.
Isn't it amazing?
It's such a treat being in an environment like this with somebody like John. And it's his insight that's allowing me to really start to feel actually part of this forest. We've stopped because the trackers think we're really close. Oh my God.
So here to tell us a little more detail about our trip to Rwanda and the Congo, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kate Humble.
Oh, I'm going to start by crying. It was an extraordinary trip, but I thought before we get onto that, I probably ought to explain why I was in the Congo in the first place, what I might have done to Johnny Bilby to make him invite me. We have a bit of history, Johnny and I. We met at a friend's birthday party. We were trying to work out when it was. It was his 40th birthday party, and we reckon he's now nearly 60, so it was quite a long time ago that we met. And I never heard from Johnny again. I think, you know, we sort of said hello and kind of recognised each other as kind of fellow travellers, and that was that until 2009, I think it was, wasn't it? And I got a phone call from Johnny saying, do you want to go to Afghanistan? And it made me think, God, did I do something really to offend this bloke? But I sort of said yes, because there is something, and Benedict and I were talking about this just before this evening started, there is something about places that you shouldn't go that make you want to go there. And Afghanistan was extraordinary. It was so wonderful. I loved it so much that, in fact, I took a film crew back there 3 years after I went for Johnny and made a film about the Wakhan corridor and about the shepherds who live there. And so, inevitably, when Johnny phoned up and said, there's this other country that you shouldn't go to, it's called the Democratic Republic of Congo, wanna go? Well, it was obvious, wasn't it? Of course I said yes. And it is one of those places that actually I had wanted to go to for a very long time. And I don't know what it is about the Congo. And there's that little bit in the film where I said, I can't quite believe I'm here. And it just has this sort of mystique. Of course, it has this sort of desperate, dangerous reputation. And again, we were talking before this evening started about what it is about a country that has that sort of reputation. And it's a bit like, some of the women in the audience will be with me on this, it's a bit like the bloke that you shouldn't fancy. Because, you know, it's like, you know, DRC to me is like Javier Bardem. You know, you really fancy him, but you know he's going to break your heart. And you know, you probably shouldn't go there, but, you know, when somebody asks, you just go, well, yeah, obviously, I'm going to go. So when Johnny asked me, I thought, I definitely am going to go there. Now, the way to get to DRC, or to the bit of DRC that we needed to get to, the easiest way is to fly into Kigali. And Kigali is the capital of Rwanda, as many of you will know. If you haven't been to Rwanda before, and I hadn't been to Rwanda before, it is an extraordinary country. It's very different from anywhere that I've ever been in Africa. We all know, I think, the desperate history, fairly recent history that Rwanda has been through, the genocide of '94. Since then, the international community has put in an enormous amount of money to the country. The president has done an extraordinary job there, and it is one of the most sort of orderly, clean countries anywhere in the world that I've ever been to. Johnny and I, when we arrived in Kigali, went just for a little walk around, and the first thing you notice is that it is incredibly hilly, and the second thing you notice is that the people are incredibly friendly and hospitable, and the third thing you notice is that it is almost unnaturally clean. And just as an aside, really, given that we finally seem to be waking up to the idea that plastic isn't a very good thing to have scattered about our lives, in 2008, so that's 10 years ago, Rwanda banned the use of plastic bags, banned the import of plastic bags, banned them being used or sold or produced. And my goodness, it has an extraordinary effect. Literally, everywhere we went, you just see no rubbish. It's incredibly clean. The landscape is beautiful, very mountainous, as you would expect. Lots of tea plantations, so any tea drinkers, it's heaven. You get very good tea. And, you know, they are extraordinarily hard-working people. Every part of the country is cultivated. We drove from Kigali, red line there. Where's that pointer thing? There it is. So we drove down here, borders here, but Johnny said, why don't we just nip into Nyungwe Forest National Park on the way? And that was rather a good idea because it's stunning. It is absolutely stunning. It's 1,000 square kilometers of montane rainforest. There are 300, for any birders, 300 species of bird in there, quite a lot of them, over 20 of them, endemic, so you can only find them there and nowhere else in the world. There are 13, I think, I'm just looking at my notes, yes, 13 different species of primate in there. It is, as you saw in that little bit of a film, it's incredibly steep. I mean, you can't really tell from that photograph, but there are these valleys that just drop down hundreds and hundreds of meters with these trees clinging onto the side. And the best way to see them, really, if you've got a head for heights, is on this walkway. It's an amazing thing. I walked across it, and the guy, Andrew, who's making the film with us, has probably got a soundtrack of me just walking across going, just keep going, it's fine, it's actually fine, yep, and humming slightly manically. But it is an amazing structure. There are wonderful trekking routes all the way through this park. So if anyone likes a bit of trekking that's going to give you the pertest buttocks you've ever had, this is definitely the place to go. But of all the things to see there, it is, of course, the most charismatic of the primate species that live in that forest that you want to see. And they don't make it easy, as I said. It is incredibly steep. You absolutely need, they give you these walking poles, and you think, oh, don't be ridiculous, I'm not that old, I don't need a walking pole. Oh my goodness, you do. The other thing to warn you, and mercifully there is no pictorial evidence of this, is that they say, oh, there are ants. And you think, yeah, okay, they're ants. These are safari ants. Safari ants basically have jaws not dissimilar to that of a lion. And they just, you know, they kind of start sort of innocuously enough. They're sort of on the ground and you kind of walk along. And then suddenly your pants are on fire. And it doesn't matter that you have barely met or know any of the men that you're with as a sole woman. You take everything off. As I say, thankfully, no one thought to get the camera out. It wasn't pretty. Oh, but this is what you hear when you're walking along. It is absolutely spine-tingling. You're walking through and you hear this sound, and it's like those little buggers are going, we can see you, but you know we can't see us. And they just tease you. You're walking around, and that sound is just absolutely magical. And then, just when you think, oh, we're never going to see them, this happens. And you spot them. And the vegetation is so thick. Now, the thing about these chimpanzees, they're partially habituated, which is sort of good and bad points to that, because obviously it means that there is no guarantee that you're going to see them. The guides told us that you have a sort of 50% chance, maybe, of seeing them. But when you do see them, they're just, you know, they don't care that you're there. So you do get the chance to witness wonderful behavior. And we saw them, and you see, you know, they're such mobile creatures. And we did see them. We saw them knuckle walking. We saw them moving through the trees. We saw them nest building. We saw them kind of just hanging out and bickering with each other. But, you know, they don't just sort of stay around and pose for you. And as I say, it is a really exciting encounter, because it just feels very fleeting, and you feel very, very lucky to have seen them. So we then, having seen the chimps, left Nyungwe, and we carried on to Lake Kivu, one of the great African lakes. There it is. And that over there, on the other side of the lake, is Javier Bardem. Now, anyone who has crossed an African border before, particularly a land border, will know that basically you have to remove the part of you that gets frustrated or impatient, and I have a very big part of me that gets very frustrated and very impatient. You somehow have to cut it off and throw it out of the window before you get there, because African borders are a nightmare. And, you know, you stand there with your kind of, you know, little hopeful face with your passport, and you've got everything kind of photocopied and everything's ready. And frankly, the border guards couldn't care less. And there's quite a lot of sort of general smoking and scratching and chatting and everything. And perhaps a look that says, well, if you bung me $50, this could go quicker. And, you know, the whole thing tends to be a nightmare. So that was very much what we were prepared for. What we weren't prepared for was a sort of orderly queue, like, you know, people were at Lloyd's Bank trying to just sort of pay some money in. And that is exactly what it was like when we turned up at the border, at the Rwanda side of the border. And we queued, not for very long, 15 minutes or so. Our passports were instantly taken and stamped, and, you know, a good day, and we were sent on our way. And waiting for us was this man. Now, this is John Kahekwa. I knew about John because I'm an ambassador for an extraordinary organisation called the Whitley Fund for Nature that supports grassroots conservationists. And John is one of the people who has had funding from the Whitley Fund for Nature for his organisation called the Pole Pole Foundation. And he is, I think you can see just from that photograph, he really is an extraordinarily charismatic and forward-thinking individual. And he basically was the reason that Johnny and I were there, because he was born in a village called Miti. And Miti is just about an hour from that border. It's quite a poor area, and obviously the Democratic Republic of Congo, because it has the reputation that it has, because it's been going through war. When the war started in Rwanda in '94, it basically trickled over into the border, over the border into DRC, and it's never really recovered since. So John's community is very poor, and to try and alleviate some of the many social problems that his people face, he set up an organisation called the Pole Pole Foundation. And the Pole Pole Foundation does tremendous work. It has built schools in his village and in the surrounding areas. It has organised tree planting projects, and this is very important. I'll explain a little bit later why it's so important. And they've been going now for 25 years, and this is how you celebrate properly. You know, your 25th anniversary, you get some blokes in to do some really serious dancing. And he contacted Johnny and said, you know, what we really need is help. And the best way that you can help as a travel agency is to bring people here, because we need people. We need people to help our people. And by doing that, we can then support projects like this, these huge tree planting projects. And as I say, I'll explain why tree planting and the other work of the Pole Pole Foundation is so important. You know, this is an area that it's been so worn-torn for so long. The contrast between crossing the border, you know, coming from neat, ordered Rwanda and crossing the border into DRC. Now, I know it's going to sound a little bit strange. For me, Rwanda was so neat and ordered that it didn't quite feel African enough. Into DRC, and you are 100% in Africa. You know, the roads are broken, every vehicle is falling apart. You've got this wonderful energy, these just people everywhere, 50, 100 different languages coming at you from all sides. But you can't get away from the fact that, you know, romantic or exciting as it may be for us as visitors to go to a place like that, to live there is incredibly difficult. And the pressure put on a population that has basically been forgotten by the outside world, the pressure on them to be able to live, to make any form of living, is incredible. And they turn, of course, to the resources that are on their doorstep, the resources that are the forests and that are the wildlife. And the result of that is, well, is very plain to see. Just down the road from John's village, Miti, is this place. This is the Luira Primate Sanctuary. It's an amazingly run place. They're looking after, at the moment, 72 chimpanzees and over 90 monkeys, all different species. They haven't just come from this part of DRC, they've come from all over DRC, but they are the proof that, you know, this poverty and deprivation that the people are suffering is having a direct effect on the wildlife. All the animals in that sanctuary are there because of poaching or because of the pet trade. And actually, what is fantastic about the work of this place is that it's not just a place that takes in orphaned animals and looks after them and kind of makes them better again. They really work not just on rehabilitation, but on reintroduction into the wild, obviously where it's safe. So they're doing fantastic work, but the sad thing is that it needs to exist at all. So this, as I say, this sanctuary is needed. The work of the Pole Pole Foundation, John's foundation, is needed because of this war, because of the fact that the world has forgotten the DRC. Because John said, and this is a really sad truth, the DRC, as I'm sure many of you know, is full of incredibly valuable resources. You know, it is basically one big mine. And however ethical all of you think that you are, and I think that I am, probably all of us have some part of the DRC in our back pockets or in our handbags, because mobile phones use an element that is mined in the DRC. And there is a thought, John's thought, lots of people's thinking that, there's no willingness from the outside world to see the DRC be more functional, be better run, because it's an awful lot easier for us to exploit it when it's in chaos. But, there are human beings out there, real people, wonderful people that we met who are suffering as a result of that. And the work that John is doing is really trying to address it. But one of the things that we can do is go there. Now, why would you go there? Why would you go to this little corner of DRC? Well, the reason that you would go there is that there is a national park called Kahuzi Biega. There are two mountains, and that's what they're named after. Kahuzi is one, Biega is the other. And this area, it's 6,000 square kilometers of forest, of swamp, of bamboo, and again, just an absolute, plethora of wonderful wildlife. It was given national park status in 1970 thanks to a Belgian man called Adrian de Schrijver. He was a conservationist, he was a photographer, he loved this part of the Congo, and he was the one who discovered that there were gorillas in this park, and he was also the one that discovered that these weren't any old gorillas. Now, he was there at the same time as Diane Fossey was working over the border in Rwanda, studying mountain gorillas. Has anyone been to Rwanda and seen the gorillas there? Okay, so you know what those gorillas are like. Adrian realized that these gorillas were slightly different. They kind of looked bigger. They had longer arms. They had slightly different shaped faces. And indeed, he established that these weren't the same as the mountain gorillas in Rwanda. These are what are known as eastern lowland gorillas. There are 4 subspecies of gorilla. This is the biggest. And you can only see it if you go to the DRC. They're not found anywhere else. So this area, Kahuzi Biega, is incredibly important for the gorillas. And of course, he was the one who thought, well, hang on a minute, how do we keep this newly formed national park? How do we keep it going? What's going to be the key? And bear in mind, this is 1970. This is quite early on in the whole idea of conservation, of tourism, supporting conservation. And he thought, if we can somehow make these gorillas comfortable around people, we could bring people here, they could bring income in for this park. It would help secure the park's future, help secure these animals' future, this habitat's future, and the people who live here will benefit from all of those things. So, he was a real pioneer in the idea of bringing tourists in and using that money to great effect, all of which was great, obviously, until the war broke out and tourists stopped going. Now, luckily, organizations like WCS, the Wildlife Conservation Society, which is a big American charity, have continued to help fund the national park and continue to help pay trackers and guides there. And that's crucial because there are 12 families of gorillas living in the park, and they go out and monitor them every day. Not all of them have been habituated, but still they keep an eye on them, and that is absolutely key because, as I say, this is a species that if it's not protected here, we're going to lose it. So you've got this extraordinarily dedicated team of trackers and guides. Johnny and I turned up there. We were given a brilliant briefing. There's nothing, you don't just sort of turn up and you're kind of chucked out into the forest and look after yourself. This is an incredibly professional and well-run outfit by people who probably paid barely anything at all, but their dedication to this park and to these animals is extraordinary. Now, the great thing about these gorillas is that they are creatures of habit, and they move from different areas of the park depending on what food source is around. And when we were there in October, they're eating bamboo. So there's a pretty good chance that if you head to the bamboo forest area of the park, you're going to see them. So that's what we've done here. We've driven to the edge. The trackers have been out already in the morning. They come back and they said they had found them. So we drove out to the edge of the park, and then we started trekking. Now, you saw in the film, it's pretty thick forest. It is incredibly exciting to be in. You know, obviously, your makeup's going to run and you're going to get a little bit sweaty and you're not going to look lovely on camera or indeed anywhere else. But there is something just so exciting about walking through a forest like that and knowing that somewhere there is something lurking that is bigger and just more powerful and just so much better than you are. And you just think, how on earth are we going to see them? How on earth are we going to know that they're there? And that, again, is the beauty of being with somebody like John. John, his first job was as a tracker in that forest when he was 19. I mean, he told me when he first saw a gorilla, he'd never forgotten it and he'd never been so scared in his life. And he's now dedicated his life to these animals. So we were walking through, and suddenly, and again, you saw it a little bit on the film, but suddenly he said, "Oh, look at this." And it was this sort of mashed up pile of bamboo shoots. And we're like, okay. And he said, gorillas have been eating that. And I said, when have they been eating it? And he said, this morning. And then we walk on, there's more mashed up piles, and there's more mashed up piles, and there's some kind of, squashed little bits of tree, and you can see where these animals have passed through, and then, never have I been so pleased to see a pile of poo. But there it was, and it was gorilla poo, and it was green, and it was fresh, and it was smelly, and it was like, oh my goodness, we must be getting close. And then, you're gonna have to put this down. Then, I'm not sure how the sound's going to work, but then you do, we've all seen, the sort of cartoons and things, but seriously, that's what you hear. You hear it, and you're just like, oh, really? 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 And John's like, come.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Come, here they are. Please enjoy. This way.
Oh my God, this is just...
You can see the silverback line and the blackbacks as well.
Just here, look.
This is the youngest in the group.
The youngest. Muira, shh. Oh, no. His name is Muira.
Oh, look at you.
He's looking in the mirror.
Yeah. This little chap here is 4 years old. And he's really curious about the camera. He's desperate to come and looking in. What can you see? What can you see?
This is Pori.
Pori.
Pori means bush.
And how old is he? He looks bigger than the...
Pori is about six years. You see, very curious.
Very curious.
Pori, how are you? This is Mama Kate.
It's a real pleasure to meet you, Pori.
Yes.
expected to get this sort of encounter with completely wild gorillas. And this is the true privilege of seeing wildlife like this in a situation where they're entirely comfortable with humans and will allow us this window into their lives.
Yeah. It was extraordinary. It was an absolutely unforgettable encounter. And it's worth remembering, though, that that doesn't just happen. You know, the reason that I was able to see those gorillas like that was down to years and years and years of unbelievable dedication on the part of the trackers in Kahuzi Biega National Park. It takes between 5 and 7 years to habituate a gorilla. And it's not just kind of popping down and leaving a banana on the side of the track. That doesn't work. You know, those animals will kill you and will injure you if they feel threatened. And it takes so long for these people, A, to be able to find them at all. Because you've seen what that forest is like. I mean, you know, you could, when you started to see them moving off, the reason they moved off was it started to rain, and you know, they don't like to get their hair wet, turns out. So they all just sort of, and literally within 30 seconds, wasn't it? They disappeared. I mean, they completely disappeared. They just go off into the greenery, and that's it, they've gone. So, you know, to find them in the first place when they're not habituated is nigh on impossible. To find them and for them to stick around for you long enough to actually see them when they're not habituated, again, nigh on impossible. If you surprise them, a big silverback is going to protect his family and he's going to attack you, and we met people who had been attacked by gorillas. These guys go out into the forest, they track them, they sleep in the forest alongside them. That's how dedicated they are. And that's what allows us to be able to have encounters like that. And, you know, you've all heard how much it costs to go and see gorillas. Actually, in the DRC, it is a fraction of the cost than it is in Rwanda. Rwanda's just put the price up. It's $1,500 per person per day in Rwanda. A huge amount of money, but actually a snip when you hear what it takes for us to be able to see them. $400 in DRC to have that experience. You know, and as I said at the beginning, the DRC does have a reputation. It's not high on anybody's holiday destination list, but if you decided to go, if you thought, I want that experience, and believe me, I will never, ever forget that experience. If you go, you'll be supporting these amazing animals, these amazing men who work day and night to look after them and their forest habitat. You'll be helping the Poli Poli Foundation, supporting a new generation of conservationists and scientists. And most importantly, you'll be supporting a future generation of gorillas. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Kate. That was wonderful, wonderful talk. If you would like to see the full version of the film that Kate and I made in the Congo, you can see that at wildfrontiers.tv, which is a new site we have where, incidentally, our third speaker also has a film on that, which we'll talk about a bit later. But if you'd like to actually go and see them yourselves and do exactly what Kate and I did, we do have a couple of trips. I told you I'm going to market a little bit to you. I've got 700 people in a room. I'd be foolish not to. So the 29th of September, that's a trip that I'll be taking with John. So anyone that wants to join us on that would be great. And then there's a second departure in 2019. We also have another trip which actually runs for 2 weeks, which also takes in Burundi. So that's a trip that's a bit longer. It also goes to the volcano in the Congo as well. So if you want a bit more time there, then that would be a trip to do. Those are 2 trips which take you into the Kahuzi Biega National Park. Finally, before I move on from this story, I just want to thank Ben Ross and Phoebe Smith of the Telegraph and of Wanderlust for having the bravery, really, I think, probably, to publish these stories. Some of you will have seen Kate's story in the Telegraph on Saturday. It does take a fairly special publication and special editors to publish stories like this, because it is to places where the Foreign Office advise against travel to, etc. So really big thank you to Ben and Phoebe for that. Right, moving on. So our next speaker is not only a great personal friend, he is also a remarkable person. Having won the Grand National for the first time as a 22-year-old in 1986, he went on to have a stellar career in the saddle, winning a then record-breaking 1,699 races, including the Triple Crown of the Grand National, the Gold Cup, and the Champion Hurdle. He was champion jockey 3 times over and is generally regarded as the greatest jockey of his generation. Since retiring due to injury in 1999, he has gone on to pursue a number of interests, including taking part in the Gumball Rally, skiing 700 miles unsupported to the South Pole, trekking to the magnetic North Pole, and taking part, albeit rather briefly, in Strictly Come Dancing. He is now a professional photographer and a Wild Frontiers tour leader. However, modest man that he is, what many of you won't know about him is that he is also an addicted fundraiser. And through various challenges and exploits, a couple of which we're going to hear about tonight, he's also raised in excess of £500,000 for good causes. Ladies and gentlemen, here to tell us about his most recent adventure, walking the entire length of Japan, please welcome Richard Dunwoody.
Thank you, Johnny. Kate, I'm not sure how I'm going to follow that. Absolutely amazing. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So how does someone come up with the idea of walking 2,000 miles through Japan? Well, it all started with this. In 2009, after my little hike to the South Pole the previous year, I was roped in, royally sponsored, for the charity Racing Welfare to replicate a 1,000-mile in 1,000 hours walk in Newmarket, completed by a certain Captain Barclay 200 years before. Here I am with my main sponsor. Some of you may recognize it, Paddy Power Jr. of the famous bookmakers. Fortunately, I was able to discard the top hat and, more importantly, the shoes before I set out. Not the most adventurous thing I've ever done either. 999 times up and down the Berry Road in Newmarket. For good behavior, they did let me out for the last mile, and I was able to walk down to the 4-furlong pole on the race course and back to the stands, and they sent a certain L. Piggott to join me. Here's Lester, looking very dapper in his grey suit. But this story is a lot more about the little lad there on the right, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him in a minute. I always said if I was ever going to do another long hike, it would involve traveling from A to B, point A to point B. One cold winter's evening in Spain, 2014, I was pretty desperate for another challenge and literally Googled 2,000-mile hikes. Top of the list was a link to this. The journalist Alan Booth's wonderful book, The Roads to Sata, a brilliantly scripted account of his hike through the country and his efforts to get to know the true Japan. He completed it in 1977, but did not publish the book until 1985, and he traveled from north to south. I was immediately hooked by this challenge and what I'd read about the country. I set out on a recce in 2014, walking about 80 miles to the sands of Totori from a city called Toyuka. And I had the time also to visit the Golden Pavilion in Kyoto, Kinkakuji. I was hoping to put the expedition together for the spring of 2016. Then suddenly my sister's son, my nephew George, that little lad in the Newmarket photo, was diagnosed with sarcoma, a rare and aggressive cancer. It literally seemed that one moment he was rowing for Team GB under 18s and competing at Henley, and the next minute he was in the Churchill Hospital in Oxford receiving chemotherapy. So 2016 was definitely out as far as the challenge was concerned. But after receiving proton therapy in the States in the summer of 2016, there were some very positive signs of recovery for George, and I decided to get my stuff together for the spring of last year. I also decided to do it in aid of Sarcoma UK, the charity that was advising, helping George, and who he was also fundraising for whenever possible. And I was going to travel from south to north, setting out at the end of February. The weather would have made it impossible to follow Alan's route starting in the north. As Johnny can confirm, I didn't really have a clue about my route. Hiroshima, Tokyo, Fukushima, the Nakasenda Trail, they were all on my mind, but finally I decided on the quickest and quietest way possible. And here we have the map setting out at Sata in the very south of the three main islands, up through Kumamoto, Kamon Straits, Totori, Nagata, up to Aomori, sticking mainly to that west coast, round that sort of axe head to Oma, ferry to Hakodate, Sapporo, and then along that west coast again to Cape Sawyer. So 26th of Feb was my first day and my first taste of Japanese hospitality. Friends of a friend of a very good friend in the UK drove me 3 hours to my start point at Cape Sata. And this is Yuki. He's a show jumper. He brought all his family along to my point of departure as well. 31 degrees north. Besides traveling a long way east, I had nearly 15 degrees north to travel up to Cape Sawyer. So I set out on a short first day, 7 kilometers as I started late. I had a spare set of clothes, a tent, a sleeping bag, a laptop, a hard drive, and my camera was a compact. It was a Panasonic LX100, brilliant compact camera it was too, travel camera. All in all, it weighed about 18 kilograms. And it was very much about getting into a rhythm and a routine. I was aiming to cover on average 32 kilometers or 20 miles a day. And that would take about 8 to 10 hours with stops. Now, knowing some of the places that Kate and Benedict will have been staying, I do feel a bit of a fraud on a nice entitled evening of adventure, showing you where I typically laid my hat. But here it is, and very cozy it was too. This is a typical room in a ryokan, or a Japanese-style hotel. Tatami mats, as you can see, made of rice straw, a futon there in the middle, and a shabudai, which is that little Japanese-style table. I'd normally stay in ryokan or in minshuku, which are Japanese-style bed and breakfasts. Or I used business hotels quite a lot as well. Generally, the rooms were quite functional, they're quite small, and I'd spend the late afternoons or the evenings when I got in planning the next day's route on good old Google Maps, booking hotels for the next few days, doing my washing, very important, the amount that I sweat, and doing a blog, editing images, and then getting out and exploring as much as I could nearby. And having shown you my typical room, Benedict, while you were eating grubs and various things, maggots for breakfast, this was my wonderful breakfast. Rice, as you can see, miso soup, fish, meatballs. At the front of the tray there is something called natto, fermented soya beans. Westerners supposedly absolutely hate natto, but I find it quite good where you mix in a load of mustard. The only thing it's impossible to eat with chopsticks, it's so gluey. But something worth trying once, I'd say to you all. For food through the day, I normally use convenience stores, Combinis, 7-Elevens, Lawson's, and in the evenings I just had to use the local restaurants. I really enjoyed Japanese food, but I absolutely loved okonomiyaki. The pancakes they have over there, and basically they just put everything into them. The meat, vegetables, fish, the whole lot goes in, but they're great, great food. When people ask me now what my worst memory of the trip was, it would have to be these, the tunnels. And this one in Kyushu was over a mile long. No option but to go through them. Most of them are surrounded by very, very steep mountains. You're allowed to go through them, you're allowed to use them. And some were great. They were well lit. They had wide footpaths or bicycle paths through them. Others, there was nothing. They were just pitch dark. You stuck your fluorescent jacket on, turned on your head torch, scraped up the side of the wall, and the lorries were sort of skimming past. But one of the highlights for me in Kyushu was this city, Kumamoto. A cool city, quaint little trams, beautiful green spaces, as you can see from this slide. But it was the first time that I saw the true devastation of an earthquake. This one hit on the 16th of April, 2016. The walls of this beautiful castle, it is an amazing castle. I was only able to walk around the outside of it, were absolutely decimated by the earthquake. They say it will take about 20 years to complete the restoration and repairs of the whole castle. 90 buildings collapsed in the city, but amazingly only 50 people were killed. 180,000 were left looking for shelter though after the earthquake hit. Now, day 19 was of significance in that I completed my first island and reached the Kamnon Straits at the northern tip of Kyushu. This is the beautiful Kamnon Bridge spanning the straits. But unfortunately for us, for pedestrians, we're prohibited from using it, and we had to use this, the tunnel, 700 meters under the straits. But nevertheless, I was very happy to reach my second island, and I tried to keep up the pace, traveling north and eastwards. But still, things didn't always go quite to plan. And when I arrived in a little town called Susa, could I find a minshuku or ryokan or hostel anywhere? Not a hope. It had just been a bank holiday, and I think the locals were recovering from the excesses of the weekend. Everywhere was very firmly shut. So out came my MSR for the first time. Typically, it had rained harder than any time previously on the trip. And being the true adventurer that I am, I struggled for ages to put it up. I also, as you've already seen, had massive problems finding somewhere to pitch it. Unfortunately, in the torrential rain the next morning at 6 o'clock, there wasn't a massive queue for the slides either. So I wound my way along the north and west coast of Honshu. Some long, hard days. My longest day was 52 kilometers, but I always tried to give myself time to see some of the local highlights in the museums. And here are one or two of these I'll tell you about quickly. There's one of the holiest Shinto shrines in Japan. It's called Izumo Taisha in Izumo. This one, at the front of it, has Japan's largest shimenawa. That very large straw rope in front of it weighs 5 tons. Certainly wouldn't want it falling on you. Izumo Taisha is supposedly so holy that every October it is said that all 8 million Shinto gods congregate there to discuss deaths, births and marriages for the next year. And the area around the temple is known as Kami-Arizuki, the month with the gods. And luckily for the rest of Japan, it is Kanazuki, the month without the gods. And also I stumbled on this. I took a wrong turn into a small, quiet village called Nikaho near Akita. And suddenly I noticed a very rare sign in English to an Antarctic museum, which was very random, very few signs in English along the way. Nikaho just happened to be the birthplace of Nobu Shirazi, who led the third team on the race to the South Pole, battling against Scott and Amundsen. I'm sure some of you in here will have heard of him, but I certainly hadn't, considering all I'd done in Antarctica. Unfortunately, Nobu got stuck in Sydney, as people do tend to. But in this case, they say it was due to a very severe shortage in funding, and he eventually set off far too late to threaten Amundsen. In February 1912, though, a team from his ship, the Canaan Maru, did make it to well over 80 degrees south and laid claim to some of Antarctica for Japan at the time. Now, for me, the highlight of the trip was the cherry blossom, the sakura. I'm not big into gardens or flowers, but I have to say it was absolutely amazing. And I had an amazing trek around this little town of Kaga in Ishikara Prefecture. Kaga was like a mini Venice with its canals, and the sakura there was absolutely stunning. And here it is the next day, slightly different weather. You can see it snowed overnight on the hills. And I also visited Kanazawa, Little Kyoto, a couple of days later. This is the very famous Kenrokuen Gardens, absolutely fabulous. The Japanese can never get enough of the blossoms, and wherever there is sakura, the cameras come out. They just flock to it. And even when a bit later in the spring, the Nanahana plant comes out, it's a type of rapeseed. When it flowers, they flock to the fields, and they construct mazes in it. They also even run miniature train rides for the children around the Nanahana fields. So I wound my way through Honshu, and wherever I seemed to go, the Japanese hospitality, I have to say, was incredible, and in some instances quite daunting. These four young ladies were having a picnic beside the road one sunny Sunday morning and asked me what I was doing. Satamazaki kara, soyamazaki made, aruite des. I gave them my standard answer in my best Japanese. I'm walking from Cape Sata to Cape Soya. They looked at me as if I was absolutely nuts. Sat me down, chatted to me for about 10-15 minutes. Then when I went to leave, they literally loaded every bottle, every bit of food on that tray into my bag. I'd have to say my rucksack must have weighed about 30 kilograms leaving, and basically there was no other option for it. I went round two corners, sat on the curb, ate and drank the whole lot. I couldn't waste the calories. I was very nearly ill as I sort of belched my way along to Sakata, my next stop. And in Atsumi, near Soroka, I also passed this cheeky little festival, as one of the dads put it. His son was carrying the ceremonial drum around the village and performing with the rest of the troupe. And while he was doing that, his father forced a lot of sake down my neck at 10 o'clock in the morning. I have to say, for the rest of the day, I didn't know whether I was going to Soya or Sata, but it was a very, very good day, a lot of fun. Eventually, I did make it to the north of Honshu, and was able to call into the Nibuta Museum in Aomori. This is quite an amazing festival. Apparently, every year they hold it from the 2nd to the 7th of August, and it attracts 3 million visitors. The floats are made of lanterns, wood, and paper, and they depict mythological characters and heroes of the Japanese. It is an incredible festival, apparently, and there are also smaller celebrations around the prefectures locally, which they say are even better. And I hear there's including a place called Hirosaki just to the south. They say that is one place to go to see the Nibuta festivals. Now, from Aomori, I had a few more days walking up to Oma, where I caught this ferry to Hakodate. And Hakodate is another really cool city. And as you can see here from this slide, has streets a little bit like San Francisco. They use this one as a film set. And there is also a beautiful fort from the mid-1800s called Goryokaku, worth visiting, and certainly go and climb the hill above Hakodate. But it's a great place. Not only is it a very westernized city, but there are apparently a lot of very good bars in Hakodate. Not that I visited any. I could have done with staying a week there, but unfortunately I had to move on, wind my way up through Hokkaido, through the capital Sapporo, and then I got to a village called Tomomai. I'd been warned a few times on the trip that bears could be a problem along the way. It had been mentioned to me that this area could be one of the worst. Tomomai is renowned for its savage bear that in 1915 ravaged a small nearby village called Sankibetsu. It apparently broke its way into various houses for about a week and killed 7 people through its rampage. Fortunately, I didn't encounter any of its descendants as I passed through the area, and this was about the nearest I got to a savage bear on the way through. Apparently, that actually, a very expensive way of advertising your restaurant, cost $500,000 to put on that restaurant. So I gradually drew closer to my destination. My trainers were suffering as much, if not more, than my own feet and legs. That was the end of the second pair. Having made it to Wakanai, the northernmost city in Hokkaido, 6th of June was my 101st and very last day. And there are few signs I have ever been happier to see than this one. The first I saw to Cape Sawyer, 24 kilometers away. Mid-afternoon, I reached the Cape. It had taken some 4 million steps to get there, and if nothing else, I certainly headed my Fitbit league. Now, I'd like to give credit to the aforementioned pedestrian, Captain Allardyce Barclay, for all of this. Had I not been asked to retrace his steps up and down that road in Newmarket, I doubt I ever would have set out to walk 2,000 miles through Japan. And I would never have experienced a more memorable or incredible journey through this fascinating country. There is a Japanese word, it's ikigai. It means a reason for being, the thing that gets you up in the morning. Walking for 3.5 months in Japan last year, enjoying the culture, customs, and respect of the people, the beauty of the countryside, and witnessing the deep affinity that the Japanese have for nature, meant my own ikigai was well and truly topped up by the time I flew home from Tokyo last year. And a quick footnote, some news on George. Well, I'm absolutely delighted to report that he has been given the all clear, and he's not had any chemo since last July. And even in early October, as you can see from this slide, he was able to run a 10K in Reading, along with his father there, Paul, and myself. So good news all round. And thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. So we do have trips to Japan, obviously. We have a 3-week trip, which goes in October, and we have a 2-week trip, which goes in November. So if you want to go to Japan and see some of the places Richard saw, please sign up for those. Right, leading to our last speaker. For those of you that were following the news last November, the BBC, listening to Radio 4, reading the Daily Mail, the Sun, the Mirror, the South China Morning Post, the Sydney Herald, or the Mogadishu Gazette, and probably just about any other newspaper, our next speaker doesn't need much of an introduction. Author, adventurer, filmmaker, he originally established himself in the 1980s and 90s as one of the world's leading explorers through expeditions to remote indigenous Communities famously achieved without the use of a phone, GPS, or backup, but by preparation alone, something I believe his wife is having issues with right now. Dispensing with a film crew, he went on to pioneer the recording of extreme journeys for TV on his own, showing the way to people like Bear Grylls, Leveson Wood, and to a lesser extent myself. He's published 10 books, recorded 6 TV series, is a trustee here at the Royal Geographical Society. And this is what he says about adventures. For me personally, exploration isn't about conquering nature, planting flags, or leaving your mark. It's about the opposite, opening yourself up and allowing the place to leave its mark on you. Ladies and gentlemen, here to talk for the first time about his latest adventures and misadventures in Papua New Guinea, a journey that certainly did leave its mark, please welcome the indomitable Benedict Allen.
Evening. Yep. What a fine way to end the evening with a disaster. What a good disaster tale. Actually, the truth of it was slightly more nuanced. Not everything you read in the newspapers is 100% true. This is, well, I'm the one on the left. Yeah, that's a friend of mine called Howard with a headdress. Howard is a real enthusiast, and I wanted to mention him first because, in a way, what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to be very free and easy. I'm going to speak fairly fast and go through quite a lot of pictures because I haven't really assembled my thoughts about what really did happen out there in Papua New Guinea. So I sort of work it through as a sort of, you can be my psychiatrist. You can sort of, we can do it together, this. But anyway, I wanted to show Howard because he sort of represents a lot of what this journey was about. It's about friendship. And I'll explain what I mean. But Howard was great. He helped me help another friend, Frank Gardner. He's a Hewa person. No, he isn't. He's a Huli. He belongs to the Huli group. And they have a very close relationship with Birds of Paradise. And I have this friend, this bloke. Do you know him? Frank Gardner, the BBC security correspondent. Some of you might have seen a TV series we eventually did together. Frank, he was shot in 2004 and ended up in a wheelchair. The first time I met him, I remember it was about 6 or 7 years before this, and he was coming along. We were going to meet together at some sort of function, and I saw him come towards me. I recognised him, Frank Gardner, the bloke on the telly who does the security issues. And he was smiling at me. I thought, that's funny. Perhaps he's read some of my books. Wonderful. He recognises me. He came up, he said, Ben Fogle, I've always, I'm one of your greatest fans. So we sort of, we got talking a bit after that. He started talking about his desire to go and see Birds of Paradise. And I'd said, well, I've been in New Guinea, but it was 30 years ago. And I tried to dissuade him, but one way or another, we ended up doing this TV series. That's just the beginning. It went downhill from there. If you've seen it, it's, yeah, I think it's sort of uplifting, isn't it? It's quite fun seeing two blokes in misery going through the swamps together. That was a sort of highlight just before Frank had to be evacuated. It was quite bad, but it was a sort of, it was a triumph in its own particular way. We did finally see Birds of Paradise, but for a while it was actually just paradise we were seeing. Papua New Guinea is the most wonderful place, full of wonders, and the birds themselves, these birds of paradise, continue to be quite elusive. We're searching here and searching there. But the glorious bit about the trip was, well, Frank, he turned out to be a glorious bloke. Then the film crew, they were glorious. I was glorious. Everything seemed to be glorious. Finally, we found a bird in the car park. I don't think it was quite mentioned in the TV series, but it didn't matter. There it was, alive and kicking. Just had to, you know those vehicles that make that noise, vehicle reversing. Had to stop them moving while we did the filming of this. To be fair, there were other birds, and the exhibition was a success, which is brilliant. Frank was happy. He had succeeded in his task, and despite all the obstacles. And obviously, at a more serious note, it was inspiring to see him tackle Papua New Guinea, the swamps, the lakes, and all the forest that was between him and these elusive birds of paradise. But it was on that journey that I began to hear an extraordinary story. I had been, as I've said, in Papua New Guinea about 30 years before, and that was why Frank obviously wanted me to help him. I came across this bloke while we were doing the filming. He wanted to tell us this bird to eat. This wasn't on camera either. There's a crown pigeon, lovely specimen. Frank would have loved to have seen this, but at this stage he'd been evacuated. And I was left talking to this bloke, and I said, I think I remember you. He said, boy, do I remember you. You are Benedict, and you made me walk all the way up this mountain to find those people, the Yifo. I said, wow, it really is you. He was a missionary cook at the time. He was only about 15 years old, 14 years old, and we had gone up through the mountains. It was a time of great confusion at this mission station. There was a gold rush, people piling in, helicopters and so on, and I'd heard of a very remote people called the Yifo, and I thought, wow, what's going to happen to them in this gold rush? And I managed to get 2 of the Yifo people to come down from the mountain and guide me to their community so I could record some of their life before it changed forever. Anyway, Michael had been on that expedition. He said to me, do you know what? That was 35 years ago, and they are still there. And furthermore, no one has been up there since you went up there 35 years ago. I thought, that is quite extraordinary. And how are they coping? How are these people doing all these years on? So I began thinking about this. This was only now 2 years ago, but I was thinking back to 35 years ago when I was at the mission station. There's an American missionary doing some baptism. There's me. Oh dear, look at the socks. I've tried to hide them in the photo, but red is not a good color, is it? The shorts, oh dear. Anyway, that's how I used to be as a young explorer. I was 26 years old. There was all this fuss about me not going with a mobile phone on this last trip. I just spent months and months alone in the forest with local people. In those days, totally sort of disappeared and thought nothing of it. Now it rather scares me. But there I am with 2 of the Yifo, 2 of the people who I managed to get to come down from the mountain. They led me back to their community. So that was the expedition. You can see on the right, you're right, yeah, there's a person called Sogamoy who's really helping me. But again, very, very young. He's got a gold miner's helmet on, and that's just a sign of the big gold rush that was now happening. There is the bloke on the left there. That's Michael, the one you saw, with the crown pigeon. That's him as a 15-year-old who had been dragooned into this expedition. So that's how I used to do things in the old days, and it's still how I do it now. Live with the local people. People talk about me not having backup. These people are my backup. So I don't take Western stuff, but what a team of experts, and they are experts. Of course, the forest is their home. So off I went. Sogamoy, this is 35 years ago, the young man helping me up the mountains. This is where we're talking about just north. There's a Central Highland Range. No one had crossed it. No one had been recorded to have crossed it all those years before, and that's what I was trying to do to meet the Yifo heading south from the Sepik River there. So very, very exciting as a 26-year-old to do this expedition. There's a photo from that time, these mountains that no one had photographed. No one had, from the outside world, had walked up there. Very few of the locals had ever walked up there, let alone an outsider. So it's incredibly exciting to be a sort of explorer, exploring one of the last scraps of the world. As I got near the Yifo, they began coming out, greeting me, led me into their community. A very, very small band of people. All the others had been drawn down by the American missionaries. The Yifo had stayed up by themselves in the mountains, and then suddenly the welcome. A little bit scary, a little bit difficult to hold your place in an orderly fashion, as you expect an Englishman to do, when people are charging out, yelling at you with their bows ready to fire. So this was a sort of show of strength, I decided. And it was absolutely terrifying, I have to say. Remember, I was alone out there, none of this backup or anything, a 26-year-old with just a few local people, and now being surrounded by the Yifo. None of these photos are in focus because I was having trouble holding my nerve. But extraordinary scenes from another world. I mean, this is heaven knows when it was, actually, but 35 years ago. I was particularly worried, I remember, by this bloke. He's very young to have a bush knife, I thought. But anyway, he's very enthusiastic. You know, you don't really want too many accidents happening. And I thought he was a bit too young, the way he was whacking it and wielding it and getting very near me with his enthusiasm. Anyway, we settled down. Didn't quite know what to do at the end of this dance. Clearly it was a show of strength. And they stopped dancing. I thought, what happens next? And I thought, I'd better go up and say something, because they didn't speak their language. Walked forward, inspected their bows, and this is really embarrassing. It looks like I'm Prince Charles or someone. Carry on, everyone. Well done, keep it up. So inspected his bows and arrows. I thought it was absolutely great. But I just want you to remember this character. He's called Kahuzi, and he is a significant person, as is everyone, but just from the point of view of my story, that is a man called Kahuzi, who I will see later. So, an extraordinary moment of a meeting from another era, two different cultures. Obviously, they'd never seen an outsider before. The YIFO, looking back on it, I think they felt sorry for me. They did something absolutely amazing. So they'd never seen a white man, never seen anyone from our culture, never seen shoes, never seen clothing. They led me over the mountain, over the Central Range. And this is what I mean. It had never been crossed before. It has never been recorded to have been crossed before. And they found a way. There were no trails, but they took me over the mountains. As I say, I think they felt sorry for me. That is now what has happened the other side of the Central Range. So I crossed over 35 years ago, over the Central Range, and now the third largest gold mining area in the world, Porgera, is there. So I wondered what has happened to that forest in 35 years. This is what happened when I met that chap Michael, thinking, wow, the YIFO are still out there. What has happened to them? What has happened to this forest with all these big developments? Are they all slaves to this mine? Michael hadn't been to see them. Very, very few people had been to see the YIFO. No outsider really knew what had happened to the YIFO, just that they were up there somewhere. What had happened to these children who used to play in the mist with a pig's bladder all those years ago? And what happened to the women? They were hidden away when I arrived and were escorted into the village when they decided I was a safe person. And what had happened to Kahuzi? He was a man who decided he should lead me to safety over the Central Range as a 26-year-old. I suppose he didn't want me to die on his hands. But anyway, he did this extraordinary thing, having to warm up his feet every couple of hours because they were so cold in the mists. We had to make little fires so he could stop and warm up his feet because he hadn't climbed up into the cold before. Extraordinary act to do that for me. What had happened to him? So I said to Michael, I've got to go back. And you can see how enthusiastic he is about it. That's him in the photo there. I remembered him as a cheerful person. Suddenly, he just didn't look very happy. I don't know why not. I don't know what was wrong with him. He should pull himself together, I thought. Anyway, I said, don't worry, I'll come back one day. He said, oh, right. Do you want to buy that pigeon? Anyway, I didn't buy the pigeon. Yes, I thought, what could possibly go wrong? Anyway, well, let's save this up a little bit. That's the next instalment. So the disaster hadn't quite happened yet. This is me coming in. I've got this bloke called Angus, the helicopter pilot, to fly me a year later back to that mission station. It's now been abandoned. I was very concerned. Obviously, no one knew I was coming. You couldn't communicate with this place where Michael was. So what was ahead of me? And I had visions of it possibly being a disaster. But we would see. I gave myself 3 weeks for this expedition. And I did that purposefully because I knew I could only last about 3 weeks. I know my body very, very well. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and decades and decades. And I know my strengths, I know my weaknesses, and I knew I had to get out. I've had malaria 5 times, 6 times now. But at this stage, 5 times. So I thought, I've got to get it in there quickly. I got myself very, very fit. And it's a one-way trip. I've got to go over those mountains. There's the beginning of the Central Range. and you can't come back. No one travels very far in Papua New Guinea. The local people in remote areas, they go up and then they come back to their area. So I was going to have to change guides as I went along. So the first stage, trying to find somewhere to land. This is the first problem I faced, which was flooding. Masses of floods, trying to get to that lowland mission station, Bisorio. Everything was flooded, and it was going to be quite tricky. Couldn't even find a landing spot. There was that little patch there on the edge of Bisorio, the abandoned mission station, so that's where we're headed. But imagine, we've got to cross the river there, we've got to go up into the highlands. But what do you do if the forest is flooded? You can't just sort of moor your canoe and then swim through the trees. So it's going to be a first problem. Yes, poor old Michael. He looked rather dazed when I turned up. And he'd sort of aged a year or so. It had been a year, but he sort of seemed a lot older than that now. He wasn't very enthusiastic about my return, but he seemed to accept it as one of the terrible things that happen in life. And he began preparing for my departure. So it was all going to be very, very quick, as I said. That next day, I was going to leave. This is the moment when, just after I'd arrived by helicopter, the helicopter had gone. All my provisions were rather worryingly disappearing into the village. And someone called Melissa very, very kindly offered to try and help the Bisorio mission. She'd seen the TV program with Frank Gardner and myself and seen the bad way that the locals were, and very, very kindly offered some money. So I brought in some supplies. There's some of them. So I brought mosquito nets and rice and so on for Bisorio, thanks to this kind person, Melissa. Essentially, as I mentioned earlier, everyone but the Yaifo had come down off the mountain. They'd been promised eternal life. They'd been promised a sort of paradise as far as they were concerned. And now, I wouldn't say it was hell, but the missionaries themselves had left, and the people there were in a pretty bad way. So, hence the supplies. But this was my launching out point. And there's the expedition. If you remember how I launched out before, same sort of thing, same place. And yeah, there's Michael trying to gather his enthusiasm. There's me at the back, and the team. As I said, these are my backup. These are the experts. They know what they're doing, and more effective than any phone in getting you out of a problem. So off we went, across the river and into this extraordinary forest. And the amazing thing to me was it hadn't changed. We're so used to these depressing tales of deforestation, aren't we? Clear felling, oil palm. This was exactly the same, and more than that. Only one other outsider had even been in there, and that was me. So it's an extraordinary thing. No scientists, no tourists, no missionary, nothing. Absolutely extraordinary in this day and age. And we walked into the forest, very, very exciting for me, not so exciting for Michael. But I was absolutely thrilled, looking around, thinking these scenes haven't been seen except by me before, and it was very, very exhilarating. The wildlife that we came across was naive. In other words, it wasn't scared of humans. It didn't know really what humans were. So there were tree kangaroos and what do you call them? Cuscus things. What's the English? Possums. And cassowaries and all the rest. It was very, very exciting. I came across the son of Sogomoy in a village garden that was just near Bisorio. There he is, Gibson. He was very, very excited to be on the journey, which was a lovely link to have him. There's his dad having his lice taken out by the Yaifo. And there he is launching out that photo I showed you earlier. So he was the young son. He was very, very pleased to be going with me, which was great. A nice contrast with Michael. He was especially pleased because he got his dad's watch. I bought this watch from Britain to give to his dad, Sogomoy, and he got it instead. And so he's thrilled with that. But it was the forest that was so exciting to me. And I just thought I should have been walking here with a scientist. It's sort of wasted on me in a way. But at least I could record what I could as I went along. Some of these lovely just things, pitcher plants and so on, just exciting discoveries. got higher and higher. The walk went on for maybe 10 days. I mean, really ruthless walking, very, very hard conditions. And you have to remember that one false step could be not necessarily fatal, but certainly jeopardize the expedition. I couldn't afford to trip. I couldn't afford to fall and injure myself. And it was getting, as we moved from the lowlands into the cloud forest, it's getting slipperier and slipperier. No tracks, obviously, most of the time at least. So we're cutting our way. Very, very, very tough going indeed, and no easy way out. But we were doing it, and it was so exciting. Michael actually was starting to cheer up. I know, because his term was almost finished. We're now nearly at the YIFO, we thought. But I put this photo in partly to try and convey this closeness. I don't take a phone for good reason, partly because I would believe in committing myself to what I'm doing, but also because I'm trying to immerse myself. I don't want to impose. I don't want the local people to feel I'm getting special treatment. My fate was in their hands, and they knew it, and it bound us together. And this is a wonderful thing about this expedition. We were all very, very close to each other. We knew we were mutually dependent on each other and had this bond. Whatever happened, we would do it together. So we're really gelling very, very well now. And it was getting higher and higher, more and more difficult, more and more obstacles as we got nearer and nearer where we thought the YIFO were. I'm not a fan of vine bridges. I always feel you get the feeling bits have been left undone. And I always felt someone could have worked a bit harder here, for example. But anyway, and I'm also, you've noticed, I'm very, very tall, and so there's always the thought that I'll just fall off. Actually, I wasn't allowed, everyone said, you will not walk across that bridge with luggage because you will just break it. I said, what about me? I'll fall out. That worried me, that bit. It made a sort of cracking noise. I don't think cracking is a good sound, is it, on a bridge? Anyway, that was bad enough. It was just my weight, but I was forbidden to carry the luggage. They thought I'd ruin their bridge. So there were quite a lot of these. Then you have to come down here. And remember, you cannot afford to... I could not sprain my ankle. I could not break my ankle. I couldn't break my neck. I could not actually do anything but be careful all day, every day. And it was very tense, day after day, concentrating. It's like doing an assault course all day because no one was going to come and get me. Following rivers, because it's much easier than hacking your way through the forest, because there were no trails. Finally, this little enclave, this amazing site. It reminded me of my trip with Frank Gardner, these scenes of paradise. And there was the settlement of the YIFO. And a strange, eerie quietness about it. I thought, that's familiar, because suddenly, boom, they were at it again. Out came the arrows, and things have changed. You can see that. There were a few more items of clothing, but the dance was pretty familiar. Round and round, people were coming, and there were the usual young enthusiast he thought was getting a bit too near. But the man I was looking for was this one, Kahuzi. Was he still around? Blimey, I look young. The sad thing was, I was about his age at that stage, and I was getting on, and so therefore Kahuzi probably was. And then I saw him. I was so excited, I can't tell you. And this is why I got a bit upset about the press coverage, to be honest, because this was one of the most magical things for me in my entire life as an explorer, finding this bloke who'd somehow endured all these years out there. And it was a very, very special moment. I said to him, through a translator, I have to say, we only had two words in common, Benedict and Kahuzi. But do you know what? He remembered my name. As I was so tired, he said, Benedict, Benedict, and he crushed me. And I said, Kahuzi, Kahuzi. So I didn't really know what to say. I said to him, that dance you did 35 years ago, that was quite scary. He said, yes, we were really pleased about that. We thought you'd run off down the mountain, right to the bottom. And I said, yes, I would have, but it was so far, I couldn't face walking all the way back. But the difference was, as you saw, that dance now was there's no fear there. There was a sort of triumphant spirit. Things had changed. There were children taking part in that dance. That didn't happen in those days because it was a fearful thing. It was young, tough men who did the dance. Now children, you can see that they're decorated in a more idiosyncratic way, so the cohesion of the YIFO society isn't quite there. They're starting to do their own thing, as it were. But none of these children will have gone out to the outside world. Some of the YIFO had, but not the children. And this was the change. They had some Western items, but now they could sleep safely at night. Because in the old days, they used to be scared of people coming up in the night, their enemies, and attacking. Now they could sleep. And that is the magic of missionaries. It's effectively, the missionaries have taken away all the YIFO's enemies. So the YIFO just left there on the mountain. It was brilliant as far as they were concerned. Missionaries are wonderful. They take away everyone's enemies. So it's been wonderful for them. They still had their land, they still had their dignity, and the people down at the mission station were in effectively misery. But the young here were healthy. They could now go off into the forest alone. They wouldn't have to worry about their enemies and so on. And time went by with the YIFO, and probably only 2 or 3 days went by when I began to hear of the fighting that was happening over the mountain, over the central range, and down the other side towards Porgera, that big mine. There's Kahuzi on the left. He was too old now to lead me himself over the mountain. As I said, he was about my age. So it was decided someone else should do it, but I was incredibly worried now about my exit strategy, bearing in mind the clock was ticking every day. I knew I've got this susceptibility to get malaria. My body was falling apart, and it was going to be tough to get out. We had the next generation to help us. This bloke called Arkai, he was a bit of a grumpy bloke, and that's exactly how I remember him being. There he is, as a little boy. Because at least everyone who was threatening me, they were doing it enthusiastically, you know. As a boy, he wasn't very enthusiastic. But there he was, and it was just a wonderful thing to be with him. And despite his grumpiness, it was just good to feel the next generation was helping me in this task. A wonderful thing. And on through the forest, this wonderful, horrible forest. It was glorious, but it was 100% humidity, and I was starting not quite to enjoy 100% of it. To be absolutely honest, time was ticking by. I've now been going 2.5 weeks or so. That cheery character there was now reduced to this grumpy person. I know, isn't it awful? That's quite, yeah, I was falling to bits, essentially. But I always knew I would. As I said, I know my body. I was the only person who knew this walk that I was doing. But now we were up on the ridge. There's the edge of the central range. I had to cross that and go down the other side. And now things started to go a little bit further wrong. Occasionally we'd come across hunting shacks like this in the middle of nowhere, and I started to feel a little bit shivery, a little bit feverish, and I thought, uh-oh, I think I'm starting to get malaria, which actually turned out to be the least of it. There was the exit, and you're thinking, what a wimp. Why didn't he just go for it? Thing is, I couldn't walk out through there because that is where the people called the Paella lived. I know it sounds like a joke name. Sort of tasty people. No, the Paella were the people who were fighting the Hewa, and the Hewa now, I was now into Hewa territory. They would not take me out through Paella country. So it would be a question of me walking out through this myself with this developing malaria. And it wasn't looking very good. So now, instead of going south, I went west with my guides, swapping guides as I went along, and got to this abandoned mission station. Another abandoned mission station. This one had been abandoned because of the fighting with the Paella. And there were local people there, still an airstrip. It was a little bit rough and ready, the airstrip. There's the people now helping me, my guides now, they're always with people, and there are the local people, the Hewa. Yeah, wondering what to do next. There was this abandoned mission station. It was rather tragic. I thought, what a place to die, because the missionaries had tried so hard to make this into a sort of Eden. You can see mulberry trees they planted here. There were avocados, there were oranges, there were lemons. It was a sort of paradise. And as I say, it's a funny place to sort of end your days, which is what it looked like I was going to have to do at this rate. This is the inside the mission house, and this is where I was to spend the next 10 days. And it became like a sort of mortuary. I didn't want to be gloomy, but you'll see why. It sort of gets worse and worse in my story. Anyway, try and cheer yourselves up some other way. So these are my guides wondering what we're going to do now. They got me to this place. I decided what I had to do was send out 3 parties to the outside world to get a message to a radio transmitter and get a missionary plane in. Shouldn't be too difficult. This is the sort of backup plan I had from before. And so sent out 3 lots of 2 people. Some went west, some went east, some went back north. So we had a last feast. They took the last of my food. It was a bit bad. I mean, I did give it to them. It was okay. But nonetheless, it meant I had very little apart from what the locals could provide. And now things were getting a little bit hard. It turns out I had not just malaria, but dengue fever. I also had a sort of case of starvation. That's not quite right, but I was now beginning to realize that what I had to do was take my destiny back into my hands and get out there myself, because days were going by, no reply had come back from these people who I'd sent out, so something was wrong, though no plane was coming for some reason. So I was getting weaker and weaker and thinking, I've just got to summon myself somehow or other. I was eating sweet potatoes. It's good, nutritious food, but I needed really good energy food to gather myself together. Humans can do great things, but only if we have a mind. Humans can imagine a better tomorrow. Animals can't. Animals can be strong, but they can't envisage the future. If they've got to struggle, if it's a survival situation. But you need to have your mind to be able to do that. And I didn't have my mind anymore. I was going in and out of fever, and it was looking pretty bad to have to walk 5 days minimum with a fever through a war zone. I'm feeling pretty wrecked already. I began preparing my stuff and drying my socks, always important. I got a pineapple that day, that was very good, but this is not just a treat, it was just all I had that day to eat. So it's not brilliant, but I was sort of gathering myself together, and I knew I had to do it on my legs. My legs they're getting better actually. I don't know why I thought, this is a good day for my legs. I should have put a bad day in. I was sort of monitoring my legs, not in a weird way. I mean, I was taking photos for medical reasons to see if they were improving or not. Do you want to see my feet? The problem with my feet was the leeches. You see, that's what they do. They drill a hole. I don't know why I shouldn't do sound effects. I don't think leeches make noises, do they? They're like a dentist drill. No, they don't do that. They just silently do that. Anyway, there are a lot of those. Anyway, my feet I thought they were coming together quite well. But it was one more thing that I had to deal with. Anyway, gather myself together. I thought, tomorrow I'm going to have to walk out before I go into another fever. Little did I know, help was on its way. Ta-da! Good old Daily Mail. Except it turned out it wasn't just the Daily Mail. The Mail on Sunday had rivals, desperate rivals. It also sent a man. So there's a race now to get this scoop of a story. And anyway, it's a very, very complicated situation why it took so long for anyone to get to me. And it wasn't their fault. But then suddenly there's this bloke, the chief Daily Mail man, chief reporter, had arrived, looking very fresh-faced from Kensington. And I have to say, it was all a little bit bewildering for me. I thought I was going to do this death walk. I don't know why I'm making it into a joke, but it was hilarious because suddenly this helicopter arrived, and I was 2 hours later sitting by a pool in a 5-star hotel. I mean, this is really very, very weird for me, and I was sort of slightly delirious, I think, anyway, at this moment. But I was euphoric as well. I was spared this 5-day minimum, or perhaps a deadly walk out. Suddenly, I was out of this situation. But I'm grateful to the Daily Mail, I should say. I'm grateful to these people who'd kept me alive all this time, and those 3 teams of people who actually were the people who sent the message to the outside world that this is where I was. Yeah, so it was a happy ending for me. But I want to make this a happy ending for all of us, because I'm that sort of nice character. It's, in all seriousness, it wasn't really... Well, it wasn't a disaster. As I said, it was a very special moment finding the IFO. And for me, that made it a triumph. This all happened after the expedition. It was on the way out. And I want to leave you with these images of the place itself. This is a photograph, this is a scene that no one has seen apart from you lot, and a few local people. It's a view that no one from the outside world has seen apart from me and you. Because it's the first time it's been seen, first time I've shown this photo. That is amazing, isn't it, in this day and age? And what a scene. It's untrammeled by humans, you could say, but as I said, it's an empty forest. The locals have left. And what a wonderful thing. But I also said that this journey for me was about friends. Right from the beginning, Howard, the bloke with the headdress, Frank Gardner, that expedition, how it led on to meeting Michael's friends, all those people who helped me, and then the YIFO, who helped me 35 years ago to cross that Central Range, and now helping me get out again. So it's all about friends, but I wanted to finish with this friend, Kahuzi, this extraordinary man who'd endured all these years, 35 years out there, total isolation, and the future that he's bequeathing. That is his son. He looks a strong character, that boy, and he's called Noah, and that's telling. It's an outsider's name, obviously, but he sort of found an accommodation with the world. Kahuzi and his son, they found a way of getting by. They've kept it at a distance. They've decided not to go and become slaves at the gold mine. They've decided to stay in their valley. They've got their land, and they've got their dignity, and they have a modicum of comfort. And I think that's what we all want in life. It's what everyone here this evening wants in life. Not comfort, as in ease, but to be at ease with the world, to be at peace with the world, to find some accommodation with the world. Thank you.
What an incredible talk. I think you know what's coming, and I'm not sure I really thought this through that well. Last year, when Benedict came and did the Evening of Adventure, we managed to sell out 2 tours off the back of it. 2018 is sold out. I'm not sure 2019 will sell out quite so fast, but if you would like to go to Papua New Guinea, not doing it quite Benedict's way, but doing it another way, those are the dates. So finally, we're running over a little bit, but I just want to quickly finish off by telling you a little bit about the charity partnership that we have this year, going back to Kate's story with the Poly Foundation. So just before Christmas last year, I cut my hand rather badly doing the washing up, doing the drying up, to be more accurate. I dropped a bowl into the sink, it shattered and went into my hand. So I went down to A&E here at Charing Cross, and the guy there kind of taking me, took my name and date of birth and all that, and then said to me, which countries have you visited in the last month? And I scratched my head for a minute, I went, goodness, Ethiopia, Congo, Rwanda, India, and Italy. Now I say that not to boast, it was a particularly strange month for me as well, but I say it to really illustrate just how privileged and lucky we all are in this room, that we can go and do these trips all over the world pretty much whenever we like and have experiences around those trips. And of course, for many people in the world, things are not quite as simple. In fact, for a lot of people, their entire lives will be spent as Benedict's just brilliantly explained, within a 50-kilometre radius of where they were born. So when we were in the Congo with this wonderful chap, John Kahekwe, I immediately saw that this could be a great opportunity to have a charity partnership. What you need in aid is people you can trust. That was John. He'd been going for 25 years, so he had longevity. And Kate and I were seeing some of the amazing things that they'd done. When Kate was showing the images of the tree plantation, one didn't get the scale of what he's done there. He's literally growing a forest on the side of the forest. It's extraordinary. The schools, etc. So I said to John, I said, if you could have one thing, if we could do a partnership with you, is there one thing that you would like to do that you've never had the money to do but that you've always wanted to do? And he immediately came back and said, what I'd love to do more than anything is to have the money to take the local people from the villages around the Kahuzi Biega National Park into the park and experience what you've experienced. They don't have the ability to do that. It's as Kate said, it's $400 for us Westerners to get the permits to go into Kahuzi Biega. For the local people, it's $20. But $20 for most of them is way too much money. These people live in a very poor part of a very poor country. So what he wanted was to be able to take local people into the national park to see and experience the incredible environment, to learn about the different plants, the flora and fauna, to see the wildlife. And he felt that by doing that, they would be far more inclined to look after their environment and the wildlife that lives within it. Humans are the only predator, the only danger to Kahuzi Biega National Park. There's no other danger. So the more people that he felt he could get coming out of the forests and being ambassadors for protecting the forest, the better it would be. And I just thought, this is great. It's a simple project. It will be easy to deliver. Let's do it. So tonight, from just you guys being here tonight and coming and listening to these fabulous talks, we've raised £6,000. So I think you can give yourself a round of applause for that. That is going to take 200 local people into the forest to have the same experience that Kate and I had. However, what would be really great is if any, I'm not going to do a Bob Geldof here and give us your money, but we do have a Just Giving page, which is at 6,000, as you can see, and I'd originally said to John, we're going to try and get it to 8,000 so that 250 people can go into the national park. So if any of you feel like going home and donating a little bit more money, that would be great. Remember, $20 pays for the permit for one Congolese person to go in. So that's it. I would just like to finish off by saying a few quick things about Wild Frontiers. That's right, sorry, I nearly forgot that. We offer, for those of you that don't know the travel company, we offer small group tours. We have award-winning guides. We use top quality hotels and transport. We offer off-the-beaten-track itineraries, as I think you've just seen, fully inclusive tours. We have an office here in London and satellite offices in the US, India, and Cambodia. We were awarded the Guardian Observer Best Ethical Travel Company Award for some of the work we've done with the foundation, 24-hour emergency service, and we are atoll protected. So finally, just to say a huge thank you to our speakers, Kate for coming to the Congo with me and for delivering that fantastic speech, Richard for all the money you've raised for all these great causes, and Benedict just for coming home. Thank you all very much indeed.